With that broken leg and that man's name, you are just a liability now. Take this $50 and go to a shelter. You are expired. My sister Isabel didn't just say those words. She punctuated them by kicking my only suitcase down the front stairs into the mud. I stood there balancing on my crutches, my legs still in a heavy cast from the car accident that killed our parents just 3 days ago. She flicked a plastic gift card at my chest, refusing to look me in the eye. Instead, she was frantically tearing through the mailbox, her hands shaking violently. That's when I realized she wasn't just being cruel. She was terrified. She was hiding something. And she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Have you ever been treated like a burden by the very people you sacrificed everything for? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. To understand why I didn't scream, you have to understand the silence I lived in for 28 years. In the Sterling family, noise was reserved for Isabel. She was the firework, the show pony, the one who sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I was the ventilation system, invisible, essential, and only noticed when I stopped working. My name is Manfred. Yes, I know. It sounds like a middle-aged German man who works in a deli. It was a clerical error on my birth certificate that my father never bothered to fix because he was too busy mourning the fact that I wasn't the son he wanted. Isabel used that name like a whip. She called me Fred in front of her friends. She introduced me as the clerical error. She made sure I knew that my existence was an administrative mistake. But while Isabel was busy curating her life on Instagram, I was in the back office, saving our parents from bankruptcy. I am a forensic accountant. I speak the language of hidden money. For 5 years I spent my nights under the fluorescent hum of my desk lamp, fighting off IRS audits and negotiating payment plans with vendors because Isabel had drained the operating accounts again. I remember one night specifically. It was 2 years ago. I was staring at a spreadsheet, realizing we were 3 days away from missing payroll for our 40 employees. I had to liquidate my own 401k to cover the gap. At that exact moment my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Isabel. She had just posted a photo from a yacht in Tulum, holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance." She didn't manifest anything. She stole it from the payroll account I was bleeding myself dry to replenish. That was the dynamic. I fixed the leaks, she drilled new holes. But the moment that truly sealed her fate happened 3 days ago in the hospital. Our parents were in the ICU, hooked up to machines that beeped in a terrifying rhythmic unison. I was in a wheelchair because of my broken leg, trying to sign "Do not resuscitate" forms with a trembling hand. I was trying to give them a dignified end. Isabel wasn't looking at them. She was in the hallway, screaming at a man in a gray suit. That man was Mr. Vance, our family's attorney for 30 years. He was a good man, a careful man. He was trying to explain to her that the trust funds were frozen until the death certificates were issued. "I don't care about the protocol," Isabel shrieked, her voice echoing off the sterile hospital tiles. "I need to put a deposit down on the venue for the wake. Do you know how hard it is to book the Rainier Club on short notice? I need a lawyer who gets things done, not a dinosaur." She fired him right there. She fired the man who had written our parents' wills while our mother was taking her last breaths in the next room. I saw Mr. Vance's face crumble, not from anger but from humiliation. He looked at me through the glass of the ICU door. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just watched him pack his briefcase and walk away, leaving us alone with a predator. Isabel walked back into the room, checked her reflection in the darkened window and sighed. "Finally. Now we can get someone who actually knows how to handle money." She looked at me sitting there in my wheelchair holding our mother's cold hand. "Don't look at me like that, Manfred. One of us has to be practical. You're just there, like furniture. I'm the one who has to manage the image of this family." That was the moment the sadness left me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized she wasn't a sister. She was a liability. And in my line of work, you don't argue with liabilities. You liquidate them. I didn't know then that the $50 card she threw in the mud would be the key to everything. I didn't know that Mr. Vance wasn't just gone, he was waiting. And I certainly didn't know that the clerical error was about to balance the books once and for all. I ended up at the Starlight Motel, a place that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. It was the only place I could afford with the $50 limit on my own emergency credit card before I hit the cap. I spent that first night shivering next to a radiator that rattled like a dying engine, drying my mud-soaked funeral dress because it was the only thing I owned. The next morning, hunger woke me up before the sun did. I reached for the plastic card Isabel had thrown at me, intending to buy a vending machine breakfast. That's when I actually looked at it. It wasn't a gift card. There was no magnetic strip, no Visa logo. It was a thick white plastic keycard with a generic Blue Mountain logo and a 4-digit code written in Sharpie on the back. 1995. My birth year. I knew that logo. Safe keeps storage. My father kept a private box there for sensitive documents. I spent my last $12 on an Uber to the facility. Getting down the hallway on crutches was a nightmare. The floor was slick linoleum, and every swing of my body sent a jolt of fire up my fractured leg. But when I swiped the card and typed in the code, the heavy metal door of box 404 popped open with a mechanical hiss. Inside there was no cash. No jewelry. Just a single manila envelope. I tore it open. It was a life insurance policy. A key man policy my father had taken out on himself years ago, separate from the estate. The beneficiary wasn't Isabel. It wasn't the business. It was me. $300,000. I stared at the paper, my breath clouding in the cold storage room. This was my escape hatch. This was a condo in a different city, a new car, a master's degree. This was freedom. I called the insurance agent immediately, my hand shaking as I held the phone to my ear. "Miss Sterling," the agent said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am so relieved you called. Your sister, Isabel, tried to claim this policy yesterday morning. He was extremely aggressive. But I told her the beneficiary designation is ironclad." I closed my eyes. Isabel had tried to steal my inheritance before the dirt on our parents' graves was even settled. "When can I access the funds?" I asked. "Since the coroner's report is already filed, I can process it today. But due to anti-money laundering regulations on large transfers, the check will take 3 business days to clear." 3 days. I didn't have 3 days. I didn't have $3. I went back to the motel. That tiny room became my war room. For 72 hours I lived in a state of suspended animation. I had a check for $300,000 in my bag, but I was eating peanut butter crackers from the vending machine for dinner. I drank tap water from the bathroom sink. I wedged a chair under the doorknob at night because the lock looked flimsy. My stomach cramped with hunger, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I laid the insurance papers out on the cheap bedspread. I looked at the numbers. I could take this money and run. I could disappear. That's what a victim would do. But then I thought about Isabel in the hospital hallway. I thought about the mud on my suitcase. I thought about Mr. Vance walking away humiliated. If I ran, Isabel would win. She would sell the house, burn through the cash, and find another victim. Predators don't stop hunting just because the prey escapes. They just find new prey. I looked at the check again. $300,000 wasn't enough to buy a new life. But in the world of distressed debt and leveraged buyouts, the world I lived in, it was enough to buy a weapon. I wasn't going to spend this money. I was going to invest it. I picked up the check and whispered to the empty room, "This isn't money. This is leverage." I had $300,000, but I needed access to Isabel's financial heart. And Isabel guarded her image like a fortress. She would never take a loan from a nobody. She needed validation. She needed to feel like she was being courted by the elite. I sat in the motel room, my laptop screen glowing in the dark, and I went into forensic mode. I wasn't Manfred the sister anymore. I was Manfred the auditor. I started digging. Public records are a goldmine if you know where to look. I pulled the title history on our parents' house. There was a notice of default filed 2 months ago, while our father was still alive. Isabel hadn't inherited a fortune. She had inherited a crime scene. She had forged Dad's signature on a high-interest hard money loan to prop up her failing spa business. The interest rate was predatory, 15%. She was drowning and the sharks were circling. That explained the rush. That explained why she kicked me out. She needed to sell the house before the lender foreclosed and exposed her fraud. I smiled. She didn't need a buyer. She needed a savior. I spent $500 of my own money to buy a shelf company. In the corporate world, a shelf company is a business that was incorporated years ago but has had no activity. It sits on a shelf, aging like wine, waiting for someone to buy it so they can look like they have a history. I bought Capital Partners, incorporated in Delaware 10 years ago. Instantly, I had a decade of legitimacy. I built a website. Sleek, minimalist, intimidating. Capital, distressed asset management and private equity. I created a LinkedIn profile for the chairman, using a stock photo of a silver-haired man who looked like he owned a yacht and had zero patience. Then I baited the hook. I sent a formal letter of intent to Isabel's business email. "Dear Ms. Sterling, Capital Partners has identified your property as a high potential asset. We specialize in refinancing distressed luxury estates and providing liquidity to select entrepreneurs. We are prepared to offer a bridge loan of $1.2 million to restructure your debt and invest in your spa expansion. Please find attached our preliminary term sheet. Sincerely, the investment committee. It was the greed blindness trap. Confirmation bias is a powerful drug. When you are desperate, you ignore the red flags because you want the lie to be true. Isabel didn't see a generic website. She saw a lifeline. She saw someone finally recognizing her genius. She replied in 45 minutes. I am interested. When can we meet? I replied as the chairman's assistant. The chairman requires full due diligence before any meeting. Please forward your last 2 years of tax returns and current profit and loss statements to prove solvency. This was the test. A smart CEO would call her lawyer. A smart CEO would ask for references. But Isabel wasn't smart. She was vain. And she was broke. 4 hours later my inbox pinged. I opened the attachment. Isabel had sent tax returns. But as I scrolled through them I saw the clumsiness of it. The revenue numbers were rounded up too perfectly. The expenses were slashed. She had inflated her income by 300% to make the spa look profitable. She had just emailed falsified financial documents to a shell company run by the sister she evicted. I sat back in my creaky motel chair and stared at the screen. Got you, I whispered. You just committed federal wire fraud. I didn't need to break down her door. She had just handed me the key. The closing was scheduled for 4 o'clock on a Friday. I chose the location myself, the Apex Tower in downtown Seattle. 40 floors up, encased in steel and glass, looking down on the city like a god. I rented the conference room for the afternoon. It was sterile, intimidating, and freezing cold, the kind of room designed to make you feel small. Outside, the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of gray and gold. I wasn't in the room yet. I was in the adjacent office watching the feed from the security camera. I wanted to see her before she saw me. Isabel arrived 10 minutes late, breathless and shaking out her wet umbrella on the expensive carpet. She looked glamorous, she always did, but if you looked closely you could see the cracks. The hem of her coat was frayed. Her cuticles were ragged. She was a woman holding onto the edge of a cliff by her fingernails. She threw her coat at the receptionist without a word of thanks. I'm here to see the chairman, she announced, smoothing her hair. And get me a sparkling water. Lemon. No ice. She was already spending the money in her head. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about evicting the tenants in the guest house to build her yoga studio. She was thinking about rubbing this investment in the faces of her friends who had whispered about her financial troubles. She was thinking she had won. She walked into the conference room. A man was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the storm. So, Isabel said, tossing her bag onto the mahogany table. You represent M. Capital? I hope you have the check ready. I have contractors waiting. The man turned around. It was Mr. Vance. Isabel froze. Her mouth dropped open, then twisted into a sneer. You work for these people? I thought you retired to feed pigeons. Mr. Vance didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, looking every bit the shark he actually was. I advise M. Capital on distressed asset acquisitions, Ms. Sterling. They value my caution. Good, Isabel scoffed, sitting down. At least you know how to follow orders now. Let's get this over with. Where do I sign? She didn't ask about the terms. She didn't ask about the interest rate. He just wanted the liquidity. Mr. Vance slid a thick document across the table. It wasn't a standard loan agreement. Buried in the legalese were 2 lethal clauses, a confession of judgment and a deed in lieu of foreclosure. In plain English it meant, if you miss a single payment or violate any covenant, M. Capital owns everything instantly. No trial. No judge. No defense. Standard procedure for high-risk bridge loans, Mr. Vance said calmly. The chairman requires full collateralization. Isabel didn't read it. She flipped to the back page, her eyes scanning only for the dollar amount. $1.2 million. Give me the pen, she demanded. She signed her name with a flourish. Isabel Sterling. With that ink she didn't just sign a loan. She signed her own eviction notice. Mr. Vance took the document back. He checked the signature. He placed it neatly in his briefcase. He tapped his earpiece. The papers are executed. The chairman is coming to countersign. Isabel checked her watch. Finally. I adjusted my blazer, took my cane and walked toward the door. The trap was set. The glass doors slid open. I entered slowly, heels clicking against marble. Gone was the funeral dress and crutches. Now I wore a tailored charcoal suit, hair slicked back, cane tapping like a judge's gavel. Isabel choked on her drink. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, then turned to Vance. "Get her out. She's my estranged sister." Vance stood and gestured to the head chair. "Miss Sterling, the documents are executed." Isabel froze. "Miss Sterling? That's me." I walked past her and Saturday. "Hello, Isabel. You look tired." She scoffed. "This is a joke." "You came to meet the investor who bought your debt," I said calmly. "That's me. I am M. Capital, and you just sold our parents' house to me." She laughed, grabbed her bag. "This is fraud. Tear it up." "Sit down," I said. "Unless you want the police executing a warrant for wire fraud." She obeyed. I slid the promissory note across the table. "I bought your debt 3 days ago." "That doesn't matter," she stammered. "The house is mine." "On paper," I said. "But in finance, debt is reality. The creditor holds the axe." Vance closed his briefcase. "You signed a confession of judgment. You surrendered the asset." Her face drained. "But the investment?" she whispered. I slid another document forward, her falsified financials. 3 sets of books. Inflated revenue. Fake expenses. That's federal wire fraud. Tears spilled. "Manfred, please. We're sisters." "You threw my clothes in the mud 3 days ago," I said flatly. I was stressed. I stood. "You gave me $50 in a rainstorm. I'm giving you a choice. Option A, sign over everything and walk free. Option B, I send this to the FBI tonight." She stared at the rain, then signed. "You're a monster," she whispered. "You always hated my name," I replied. "But it means strength. The name fits." I signaled security. "Escort Ms. Sterling out. She's trespassing." I never spoke to her again. She filed for bankruptcy months later. I sold the house, started Sterling Forensic Accounting, and moved into a quiet condo. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for the audit. The books are finally balanced.